All right, step one. Very good. I really appreciate all of you guys showing up today and taking time out of your very busy schedule to learn more about UI investigations. I do have a presentation. Let me try to share my screen. And we'll try to make this kind of informal today. If there's any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. There is training credit for this course, so wait to the end, and Kathy's going to drop something in that chat box so you can go to the Google link, answer the survey, and get your certification paperwork. All right, I think we're good. All right. Well, my name is Rebecca Lyons. I'm the IA intake person here in Butler County. I've been doing this for 15 years. And prior to that, I worked in a lot of provider settings with waiver homes, with ICFs, with day programs, and I was the MUI point person in those roles. So I dealt with a lot of the UI investigations and the UI paperwork. So I know exactly the position that a lot of you are in. And that's kind of why we started creating these presentations. See if I can get this to move on. There we go. Okay. Excellent. So our agenda today, again, we're going to kind of try to keep this informal, but if you can keep your microphones muted when you're not talking, that would just help everybody to hear. Our agenda today, we're going to look at rule requirements. We'll look at immediate actions, steps for investigating UIs, something that is not spelled out very clearly in the rule, if at all. We'll look at cause and contributing factors in prevention planning. And I've actually peppered some examples throughout the presentation to hopefully make it a little more interesting and get some practical stuff in there too. But again, if you have any questions, just interrupt me, put some, drop your questions in the chat, and we can address those as we go. Okay, so first, why are we here? I actually have these backwards. So the first bottom line reason why we are here is to try to prevent fewer adverse incidents for the people that we serve. That's the whole purpose of our quality system, is to try to create things from progressing into something worse or to continue happening. We don't want bad things to happen to our folks, and we can't always prevent it. But when we do a good job at our investigations and our plans, sometimes we can make a difference. And secondly, it's compliance. It's a rule requirement that we do this. I don't want citations. I know you don't want citations. So we're trying to do the best we can with the rules that we have. This is an overview of our quality improvement process. Everything starts with an incident. And it's important to note whether it's categorized as a UI or an MUI, they all go through the same process. I have some guardians call me sometimes and they're confused or concerned why an IA wasn't assigned. Why isn't this being investigated? And the short answer is it is being investigated. It's just a different person who's the point for that investigation, but it's going through the same steps and the same outcome is what we're looking for. So it starts with the incident, and what that is determined to be kind of, again, indicates whether it's an IA who's investigating or the provider. But they all need immediate actions. They all need cause and contributing factors identified and that prevention plan in place. And those last two steps are the same people doing it, whether it's a UI or an MUI. That would be the team, the provider. You guys are responsible for that piece. And that's the critical piece, really. So I tell those guardians that, and sometimes they're okay and sometimes they're not, but it is what it is. So we'll go to what an unusual incident is. And the rule definition, this is something outside of the ordinary. It involves the individual. It's not consistent with operations policies. Maybe the service plan, something wasn't followed in there. It doesn't quite meet criteria for an MUI, but the rule is actually really good about giving us examples of what they are looking for. So the examples they share are injuries, really of any kind. That could be a red mark. It could be losing a tooth. Falls, ER visits or urgent care visits, overnight relocation. Our peer-to-peer incidents, this could be individual Susie hit individual Bob, bruised his arm. We're not going to file an MUI for that. We're not going to have an IA assigned, but we definitely want to check into why Susie's hitting Bob. And, if they live together, we want that to be a safe place for both of them. So that that investigation is very important on your end. Med errors, it might be an allergy pill that's missed, something where there's not a high risk of immediate harm to the person, but we still want to address that, right? It's not okay to have med errors. We want to see if staff are messing up, if they need some help, assistance doing something, or we just want to get to the bottom of what's going on so something worse doesn't happen down the road. Rights code violations. This is one I don't see very often in the UI logs, so I'm not sure if they're being documented right, but if you have an individual who wants to go to church, for example, and the staff is of a different faith, they're not willing to take them, they don't feel comfortable with it or whatever, and that individual voices that concern, that's a UI rights code violation. So that needs an incident report. It needs to go through the process so that you can fix whatever it is to get them to be able to go to church, which is their right. That's one example of many, but make sure you're documenting those rights code violations. UBS, and the last one is program implementation error. This is a low-level neglect. Our example here is that there's a 24/7 home. They require 24/7 staffing. But overnight, your third shift staff decided to cut out early. Maybe she had a sick kid or something was going on, but she left her shift 90 minutes early, left 3 people in bed asleep. So we're going to have a lower risk, right? Because they're in bed, they're asleep, not too much can happen there. We will probably check their plans to make sure that's the case, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a UI. It's not okay that the staff left without telling anyone, and it's definitely not an okay situation. You need to go through that UI process to investigate, see what's going on, and address it. But that's the example there. One thing to note is what is not included in this list. We have behavior documentation without injuries. Maybe the individual is cursing at staff, they're hitting staff, they're destroying property. I see a lot of incident reports with that kind of information on it. I just want you to pay attention that that's not really technically a UI or an MUI. There might be a separate form you need to fill out for that. Staff injuries, this is not an HR workers' comp form. You want to make sure it's specific to the individual. And the reason for that, when the state comes to look at your paperwork, they're going to want to look at your UIs. When you fill out an incident report, they're expecting you to go through the full UI investigation process, and it really should be linked to the things that are in the rule. Or if you have a policy that outlines something slightly different, and that's okay, they want to see that full process. So when you are including staff issues with each other, police showed up to the home, that's not on here, behaviors, those should be documented, but maybe not on an incident report form. So the rule has different requirements, whether you're an agency provider or an independent. I see a lot of independents here today. But for agencies, they assume that you have more layers of management, maybe more individuals, more homes. So you need a full system. But it outlines that UIs need to be reported and investigated by the provider. That is your rule responsibility. But if you're an agency provider, you need to have a written policy in place. So today, your homework, go back, check your written policy, make sure that it is there and that it is addressing the following things. What is to be reported as a UI? Again, I will always reference you back to the rule and their examples as a fairly exclusive list. If there's something else that you feel needs to be a UI and needs to be investigated, that can go in your policy. You want to check that with DODD, make sure that you're legit there so they don't come down and say, nope, you need to stick to the rule. But I will always refer you to your policy and to the rule. You need a point person. If you're an agency, you need someone to filter through these reports. So basically your direct care staff will be filling out the report. They'll be sending it to that point person. That needs to be in your written policy, who that is, what that role is. So they can check, they can filter out, decide this is a UI, this might be an MUI, we need to take this course. And they need to initiate proper actions. Those reports need to be made no later than 24 hours after the occurrence or discovery. A side note, if you have staff holding on to what they think is a UI for 24 hours, but it was an MUI that needed to be reported yesterday, then you might wind up with a failure to report. So be very careful with that. Make sure those staff are getting those to your point person sooner than that 24 hours. or at least the notification. Your policy also has to include your requirements to investigate, identify cause, and implement the prevention plan. And lastly, you need to make sure all your staff are trained and knowledgeable on your policies. They need to know the forms to use and who to send it to and the timeframes that you expect. That's pretty common sense. The last on this slide is the provider must notify other providers of service of UIs to ensure continuity of care. I get a lot of reports from a day program or from a residence where the individual was transported back and forth, and maybe they showed up the day program with a black eye. And the day program's like, we didn't hear anything about this black eye. We have concerns, we have suspicion now because there's no communication. So I would encourage you to do that timely notification to the other providers, just to combat this. A lot of these don't turn into MUIs. It turns out that he woke up, he hit himself, or he did something to cause that, and the residential provider was aware of that. They just didn't communicate that very clearly or very well. So I would highlight that just to make sure you guys are all on the same team, on the same page to figure out what's going on. And we talked about timely notification. For the independent providers, yours is a little more simple. You're just required to fill out the paperwork, the incident report, make your notifications, and forward that incident report to the SSA by the next working day following your discovery or when the incident happened. So the SSA is going to be your point person, more or less, for those. If you know it's an MUI, do send it my way too, please. So I kind of have this as our outline going forward. Our little course of action here, you have an incident, it goes through the steps. So as we go through, we will keep coming back to this to move on to the next stage. So if you're that point person or you're the independent provider, you have an incident. Your first step is to determine, what is this? Maybe it's an MUI, maybe it's a UI, maybe it's neither. So you got to figure out kind of what you have before you know what to do with it. So I put some examples here, and I will open this up to your thoughts on whether you think this would be an MUI, a UI, or neither. But the first example, the individual showed up to day program without a lunchbox. The residential provider didn't respond to calls, so the day program went ahead and fed the client per their dietary needs. What do you think that report would be? Any thoughts? I see a chat. It says neither, question mark. I agree. That is neither. That is, it's not nothing. It needs follow-up, but I would put that in the other category. Here in Butler County, we call these incidents. They're not a UI. They don't require a full-blown investigation. They really don't belong on an incident report. The client was not, their health and welfare was not affected. This is a communication issue maybe between providers that needs to be addressed, but there are no issues here that need a full investigation, right? So if I was the point person receiving this incident report, I would probably document that as an incident, set it aside, or transfer that to a different form just for clarity. Because if the state came down, I wouldn't put this incident on my UI log. I wouldn't keep it in my UIs because my follow-up is not going to be formal. It's not going to be a formal UI investigation. Does that make sense? Hopefully. The example 2, the individual was home with their family and they reported to their staff that they had money stolen. Would that be an MUI, a UI, or maybe neither? Any thoughts?
MUI.
That would be an MUI. We have an allegation of a theft. So regardless of whether that happened with you or at home, if the individual is saying they have something that was stolen, you want to write that up, make sure that they're calling police to file a report. If they're not willing to do that, then that's your responsibility as the provider to notify police. Make sure that's getting over to the county board in 4 hours. Any kind of theft is clear MUI. So that's one. And the last one we have here, the individual fell, they cut their lip, they required 3 sutures in the ER. Do we have an MUI, a UI, maybe neither?
UI.
That's a clear UI. Yeah, on several accounts, because we have a fall. So a fall all by itself is a UI, but we have an injury, they cut their lip, that's a UI. And we have 3 sutures in the ER, so they went to the ER. So on any one of those points, you would have had an incident report to write up, but we had all 3. So you're going to fill out that incident report for sure. Okay, so after we determine what it is, where am I? There we go. Okay, we go to our immediate actions. So this is exactly what it sounds like. It's the action we need to take immediately following our discovery or the incident itself. There is some crossover between immediate actions and prevention planning. Sometimes they might carry over, but this is that intervention that needs to happen right away. So some of these examples, you're not going to have this for every case, it's case by case. But if you have a fall, you want to look them over for injuries, maybe initiate first aid if they have a cut or something that requires a Band-Aid or cleaning up. Maybe take them to the ER, call 911. If there's a med error or they ingest something, you might want to call poison control. You might want to call their doctor. If they miss a med, you might want to get direction on if they should take their next med as ordered or if they need to hold it, what needs to happen in that situation. If there's a theft, you want to secure their property or their money, encourage them to do that. If they've gone to the ER and they've ordered new meds, make sure those are picked up as soon as possible, and so they can get their antibiotics or their pain pills, whatever was ordered. Separating the individuals. If you have a peer-to-peer incident and they need, they're fighting, they need to be separated. My ask is that you document whether that was a verbal redirection or if it was a physical intervention. Because if you say separated the individuals, I'm always going to ask you, was this a physical escort or a restraint of some kind? Because that would be an MUI for unapproved behavioral support. Or was this a verbal redirection where you said, hey, knock it off, go to your room, and so they left? 2 different things. So clarity of language is helpful to me there. If it's an allegation of physical or sexual abuse, you want to remove that PPI, the primary person involved. That's our perpetrator, our suspect. Want to make sure they're not working with clients during that investigation period. Yeah, the others are just case by case. Do what makes sense. It's basic common sense. How would you intervene to make sure that person is safe in that incident? We're moving on to the investigation period. Again, if we have an MUI, I'm going to be assigning an IA. So you want to cooperate with them and get them what they need. They are responsible for that investigation. And again, our specifics are very detailed as to how we need to go about our investigations and our time frames and what we need to gather. We have a very clear process. The UI is not spelled out for your investigations. And I think that's intentional. Because if you had a lot of boxes to check to make sure you're in compliance, you would kind of get lost in those boxes and miss the point, I think. So they leave it vague, which I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's why we're here, right? So I'm going to go on. I'm going to give you some tips for general investigation. I didn't make these up. I got these from DODD, from their advisement on what a good UI investigation looks like. So the first thing first, if you're an independent, you're writing this out, you want to take a look at your incident report, you're going to send that over to the SSA. If you're the point person in the agency, you want to take a look at what is written. You're looking both for content and for compliance. So you want to see that everything's filled out thoroughly, and you want to make sure that it tells a good picture of what happened, that the who, what, when, where, what happened prior leading up to this incident, all of that is there. I have an example from DODD. I hope you can read that, but I think we'll get you a copy of this after if you need to zoom in a little bit. But this is an incident that they gave for Betty White, who was eating her cereal. She stood up, immediately dropped, had some redness to her knees noted. She said she's okay, she's just dizzy. If it's my incident, if it's my provider, my agency, then that's basically what I just told you is what I'm expecting to see. They have a novel here. I don't think you're going to get this. from your direct care staff. The more detail, the better, but yeah, this is the ideal perfect situation. And just the basics, I think, is sufficient. But again, you're going to note the injury, the immediate action steps taken, that they assessed her for injuries. They called the supervisor to let them know Betty's fallen. Maybe she needs to get in with her physician. Maybe they need to be made aware to see what's going on. Very critical, the notifications. I am told that DODD has been citing quite a few providers on notifications for their UIs and MUIs. So make sure that section is complete. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. So if you leave it blank, they're going to say no notifications were made, and that is a violation. Lastly, the PPI up here in the middle, name of PPI. Again, this is our primary person involved. It's our suspect. So if you put a name in there, then I'm going to start thinking, there's more to this story. Who pushed Betty out of her chair, you know? So you want to make sure that's NA on most of your cases, unless there's an allegation of abuse, neglect, theft, something with a perpetrator. I've been seeing a lot of that. That's why I'm bringing that up. So the back page, when you get it, if you're that point person for the agency, it'll probably be pretty blank. This is your UI documentation for your investigation. This shows your work. It shows all of the things that you're going to be doing in your medical follow-up, your administrative action to review the plans and the paperwork, which we'll get to in a second, your cause and contributing factor and prevention plan. You want to make sure that is filled out completely. Independence too, that's expected that you fill that out as well. Okay, so our first step in our investigation is to check out that incident report, make sure it's thoroughly completed up to this point. And then you're going to start your investigation. So you want to look at documentation for the person. If there's a med error UI or an ER visit, maybe where there was a medication added, you want to check those medication administration records. The MARs will tell you a lot, especially if you want to make sure that any new medications are added in there and are being given regularly. You want to make sure if something was discontinued, it actually was, because a lot of MUIs for neglect stem from these little issues where the person was added, went to the ER, they had a medication added, they never received it. They didn't get their antibiotic for their UTI. And so it got worse and worse and nobody checked. So that became a neglect MUI. We don't want to see that. We don't want to see anybody get worse. We want them to get their meds. We want everything to be done properly. So make sure you're checking those as part of your review if it's a medically related case. Check the ISP. Some of you may know your client back and forth. If you're an independent, you know that ISP. You know this is a contract that you have signed. You acknowledge the person's needs, and you acknowledge that you can meet their needs in very specific ways outlined in the plan. So as a good rule of thumb, it's good just to check that ISP during a UI, just to make sure this incident is addressed in the plan. Does it need to be if it's not? Is there a history? Is there a trend? Are there a lot of falls lately that now need to be included as a trend? Is there something that staff should have been doing here that they weren't? Do we need some more retraining? Could we have neglect? And etc. The plan will tell you a lot, and it's good to check in with that to make sure you're still able to meet that person's needs, or if the person's needs have changed, make sure the team's aware of that and the paperwork reflects what's actually going on. Next, I like to check the staff notes in the home, progress notes. If you don't have this, I think it's fantastic. It's just communication between shifts to say kind of generally what's going on in the home. This person's not having a good day. They haven't eaten their food. Just excellent to check out. And if you do have that in your homes, I do recommend reviewing those every so often, because you'll find some interesting things in there. I know we found some interesting things in there that weren't reported or just were very good for the team to know. It just never got to the team communication. It just got stuck in those notes. Last on this page is the urgent care or the ER visit summaries. You want to take a look at those. I gave you an example here. Because this summary is fantastic for your prevention. If you have an ER visit, you're looking at the instructions, the recommendations from the physician. That is a perfect place to start for your follow-up. So it'll start up top. You'll have the diagnosis somewhere up there. In this case, this was a formal admission, and I know that by a couple reasons. One would be the dates up at the top. You see that's more than one day. That's a pretty good sign that person was formally admitted. And over to the right at the very top, you'll see MVH, 10th floor, advanced neuro. That's the department from which they were discharged. So I have a lot of providers tell me, I'm not sure if they were formally admitted or not. So I say, send over the summary because it's always going to tell you at MVH, Miami Valley Hospital, that's a formal admission. If it was an ER visit, it would say something like emergency department, ED, ER. There's something with an E meaning emergency, and that's the case 100% of the time. So that might help you if you're looking at paperwork and you're not sure if it was a formal admit or not. That's the place to look. But your follow-up, again, you want to make sure you're looking at the medication changes, any dietary changes or suggestions, any follow-up that's needed. Every piece of that you want to follow up and make sure that it is done thoroughly. Okay, we'll go on, same on the back. As you're continuing your documentation review, you want to look at nursing notes if you have a nursing department, maintenance records, staff schedule, clock in and out sheets are helpful. I've found who was on the premises at this time, who was supposed to be there. Were you billing for that hour that the staff decided to leave early? Did they clock out? You want to make sure you're not getting into Medicaid fraud by billing for time staff wasn't there. Look at financial ledgers and receipts on financial things and your staff training history and records. You want to keep good records of what you're training your staff, dates, topics, signatures, sign-in sheets. You want to have all of that. And that's just because if it continues to be a problem, you might need to go to the next disciplinary action in your agency, and you want to have a good record that, yes, this person was trained on this date to do this, and they've continued to not. At any time during your review so far, if you feel like there's been an MUI or you have any questions, you're not sure what you're looking at, stop, give us a call. I'm happy to give you some guidance, or, if there is an MUI, we could take that over at that point. Your next steps, you want to talk to people. And this might be early on, depending on the case and what you know about the person's plan. You might need to look at all that paperwork. So you might just start talking to the staff who were there, the other individuals in the home. You want to get as much information as you can about this, whatever it is that's going on. If there's peer-to-peer incidents, you might want to talk to other staff from different shifts to see what the dynamic is between these peers. Again, we don't want to have violence in our homes. We want to make sure they're safe places for everyone. So you want to gather as much as you need to try to figure out what's going on here and how can we address it. You might need to talk to the day program. If you're seeing falls at home, you could ask, what's going on at day program? We need to talk. We need to get this figured out, or the guardian, or anyone you can think of who might be able to provide more information. I would add neighbors possibly. If you're having something where they might be a witness, it doesn't hurt to reach out to them and say, we're going through this investigation. We're just curious if you've seen anything out of the ordinary. Visiting the scene, I recommend this for falls, especially if you have multiple falls, you're not sure what's happening, or injuries. It's good to just check out the environment. You might find furniture in disrepair with like exposed metal or something. We've seen beds without padding where it's caused injury to the person. And having eyes on that, you could say, oh, this is obviously what's causing this injury. So let's get this fixed, and that should prevent future injuries. Uneven surfaces on the floor, that might be something someone trips over. There might be something obviously in the way that needs to move, or a rearrangement of furniture that makes more sense. If you have scratches, you might want to check people's nails. Check the individual's nails. Are they long and jagged? Are they doing that to themselves? But you might even have staff who have long fingernails and just accidentally are scratching. So you can check into all of those kind of things just by putting eyes on or getting photographs. Lastly, after you've talked to everybody, you've gathered all the documentation you need, you've looked at the incident report, you want to review all of your facts. Does this story that you have now, does it make sense? Is everything consistent? If not, you might need to go back and do more question the staff a little bit more, you might want to consult with us over here at the county board. We're happy to do that for you, to help you out. Tips, you want to stay incident specific. So if XYZ has always happened to Bob, you can't assume that in this case, that's what's happening. You want to, it might be, if he's got a history of doing whatever, that might be exactly what's going on here, but we want to verify that and not assume. And lastly, you want to be careful of bias, meaning the staff has worked here for 20 years. She has a heart of gold. She would never do this. She could never do that. Maybe she did. Maybe it was a bad day, and we don't want to dismiss that idea that maybe we need some more staff training. Maybe something further needs to happen here. Okay. So we move past our investigation. We know what happened. We have a general idea of what's going on. So we're looking now into the why. Why did this happen? So we can start addressing those whys. So some thoughts that the state gave, the types of causes you might see have to do with process. People or human factors, I see this more than anything. Just they weren't trained correctly. Things weren't communicated. They missed a doctor's appointment because it just was a miscommunication. A scheduling error, things like that. Equipment, if they don't have the Hoyer lift or they don't have something to do their job, then that may not have happened. That might have caused an injury or something like that. Environment, again, yeah, lots of environmental factors could be at play, especially with falls. If they tripped over something, that's called environmental cause. Materials, if they don't have medications or Depends or something they need, that also probably goes back to people or human factors, but we'll say they didn't have what they needed at that time. The state gives us 5 whys. It's a kind of a systematic way to figure out what the root cause is for an incident. So you take your concern and you say, why? You're just digging deeper and deeper. Well, why did that happen? Why did that happen? And I have a couple examples. The first one is we have an incident where Bob broke his arm. So we ask why? Why did Bob break his arm? Well, he fell. And we could end our investigation there. We could send out the health and safety alert on falls. We could retrain staff, be on the alert. Bob has fallen. We need to keep an eye out for more falls and document and track. And that could be the end of it. But in this case, we need to ask more whys. So why did Bob fall? Bob had a seizure in this case, and we know Bob has seizures. He has a disorder. So we could end it there and we could send him to his neurologist and change his meds and do all kinds of things. But we're not going to get to the bottom of it here. There's more to ask. So we ask, why did Bob have a seizure on this day? And in this case, he's not been taking his meds, and staff tell you he's actually been refusing his meds. And there again, you could end it there and try to address med refusal. We're going to encourage him to do better and all of the things. But when you talk to Bob, you ask, hey, Bob, why are you refusing this med? And he tells you that the pill is too big and it's hard to swallow. Well, that right there, that's our root cause. He wasn't taking his medication. He doesn't like the pill. That's a pretty easy fix. But if we stopped anywhere before that, we wouldn't get to that root cause. So it's important to keep digging as far as you can go. In this case, you might even ask, is he having swallowing problems? Does he need a swallow eval? In this case, we'll say no, because that's the example we have. But you can always ask more whys until there are no more to ask. You're at the bottom. When you run out, you start looking at what needs to be addressed. So our prevention plan is going to be very specific to consulting with the pharmacist or neurologist. You want to know who did that and what date, what they did about it. The meds were changed, and you can verify all of this with your MAR, with your paperwork, with your documentation. All of that goes onto the back of your incident report. Our second example here, we have Susie taken to the ER. Why? Because she has a UTI. We ask why. She hasn't been intaking enough fluids. And it turns out she had a change in her needs where she can't ambulate like she used to. So she's not getting the water that she needs, and staff have not been offering. And we ask why. They weren't really aware of this. They weren't trained to do it. Nobody really thought twice. It's not in her ISP. So this is a good place to address that. So our prevention plan is going to address those whys. We'll say, we'll follow up on the UTI. She was seen in the ER. She was given antibiotics. We can show the discharge summary. We could show the MAR or the orders that were given for her antibiotics and that they were given. She followed up again with her primary care. We have that paperwork as well to go in our file. They recommended certain things, increasing fluids, drinking cranberry juice. Our paper review here notes that there have been several UTIs over the past 2 years. This is not the first or the second. So we're going to have a team meeting. We'll call that together. We can document that. And we're actually going to add it to the plan that based on the history of UTI, staff need to encourage fluids and offer cranberry juice. And then our last piece, of course, we need to make sure the staff know that information. So we're going to offer a training to them by home manager Bob Smith on this date. We're going to have a sign-in sheet, and it's going to tell us exactly what they were trained on, and they're going to sign off. So all of that goes to a pretty simple ER visit. Does that make sense? Okay. We'll go back to our Betty White example. This is the one where she was eating her cereal. She stood up, she fell, she has red mark. This is DODD's example of what needs to be a follow-up. In this case, you'll note that they called her doctor. The doctor said, come on in, let's have a follow-up visit. We're going to change some meds, maybe for her blood pressure. The administrative review, if you look here, they did review her history. They reviewed her plan. They noted in here, this is the first incident, the first fall for Betty since 2016. And that one was environmental. She fell over a rug. Her plan does not address any risks of falling. And the staff were providing the needed support before and after the incident. I think this is very critical to note. They're putting what happened and what they reviewed. They're also putting what didn't happen. What didn't happen here was abuse. What didn't happen here was neglect. Staff were doing what they needed to do. Here's what we have at this time, and here's how we're addressing it. That's a very thorough administrative action. I approve. I don't see that a lot, but I think it's very good to note, again, you're ruling out abuse and neglect as you go for all of these incidents. The cause and contributing factors, pretty simple. We had a med change. The blood pressure medication needed to be changed. He also noted that Betty was rushing to get ready for her day. So those are our two bottom line root causes of what happened to cause this fall, which is otherwise a relatively minor fall, right? She fell, she got red knees, but look at all the changes that we've come up with because we dug a little deeper, we asked more questions, we got her to the doctor, and now she's going to change some meds and staff are going to monitor. They're trained to do that. We have a whole plan that addresses this so that it doesn't get worse. She doesn't fall and break a hip or, something that could have been prevented at this level. Okay, our last step here is our prevention planning, and we've kind of talked about it. It goes hand in hand with the cause and contributing factors. You figure out the cause and you have the answer. So some ideas for you on prevention planning. Retraining is always great. If anything changes with the plan, retrain your staff or make sure you're versed on what is new. Consider possible changes to the ISP if that person's needs have changed or if the services they require have changed. You want to make sure that that's in the ISP. Any trends and patterns need to be addressed by the team. You want to make sure that your staff are able to provide the care that they need to. That kind of goes back to the training and their abilities. Communication. If you have the incident of the unknown bruising, it's a UI level, and you're having miscommunication between day program and residents. I've seen a lot of people use a little notebook that goes with the person back and forth. So before they leave home, staff are going to write in there, it was a great night, nothing noted, or you know what, he woke up with a little bruise on his arm. He said this happened. Just that little bit of communication will go a long, long way. You want to develop strategies that go beyond reminding individuals to be more careful. I see this on a lot of UIs, and they want to get a little bit past that. It's beyond just reminding them to be more careful, but what maybe is actually causing this fall or what actually is causing this. And we're not always going to know, but we have to show an effort. Might need more follow-up, might need a referral for counseling or some other supports. And pay attention to your staff if you're an agency. to your direct care staff's needs. Maybe they have things going on in their personal life that is coming into their job. Um, just keep an eye on that to try to prevent bad things. So in prevention planning, some good questions to ask. Basically, does this step, will it address the cause? Will it help them? Will it minimize recurrence? Will this make a difference to the person? And finally, how can I make sure that this was implemented? That paperwork goes a long way. If you hold on to it, staple it to your incident report, then you have a full record there of what happened. Lastly, what time is it? Yeah. I put in some troubleshooting questions, things that I know I've struggled with in the past. So what if we get to the end of the investigation and I still have no idea why this happened? It was unwitnessed, it's a bruise. They can't tell me what happened or they don't know. And there was nobody around, there's no doctor, there's nothing. I don't know where to go from here. So my first suggestion is to dig deeper, ask more questions. There will be times when, like that scenario with the unknown origin bruise, you just don't know. There's no idea. I would start a working hypothesis with potential causes, meaning if this person is on a blood thinner, if they're older, those might be some cause and contributing factors, not cause, contributing factors to why they're bruising so much. But it wouldn't take very much in those cases to cause a bruise. You want to look at their history. You definitely want to rule out abuse or peer-to-peer acts. So are there peers who might be aggressive? Are there any suspicions of abuse? Any previous similar injuries? You're just looking more broadly. So if there's a peer in the home who we know is aggressive and nobody saw them hit the other peer, but the other peer has a bruise and it's kind of similar to what typically we've seen in the past, you might want to go ahead and say in your UI investigation, we don't know what happened, but there is history of peer-to-peer aggression. So we're going to address that. We're going to have staff monitor additionally to see what's going on. We're going to definitely monitor their interactions and try to get them redirected before things become a problem. Again, addressing a possible cause is better than doing nothing. But make sure you do put that caveat that we don't know, because if you start addressing the peer-to-peer, then it's going to be assumed that somebody saw a peer-to-peer incident. But I think that's a good way to go. Another troubleshooting issue, what if you're not having cooperation with your prevention plan, or if the guardian or individual is asking for a restricted measure? I would just encourage you, yes, you're responsible for all of this, but incorporate the team, incorporate them into the prevention planning. Say, look, this is what we have. Here's why I think it happened. And they might even be able to help you with the why too. What can we do about this? What should we be doing about this? Even at the UI level, I think it's okay to reach out and incorporate everyone, brainstorm some ideas. Because again, Betty's fall, we want to make sure we're getting her needs met in that moment and not waiting until she has a very significant injury to figure out that her medications were making her dizzy. I put a note in here, if the guardian makes a decision against, it could be physician recommendations or rule recommendations, you want to take that to the team and document. And the scenario I was thinking of here was the individual got out the knives and were cutting themselves. Not a suicide attempt, minor injuries, not an MUI. So the guardian advised, lock up all the knives and make sure that you lock up this and lock up that. So before you lock things up, just take a second to pause and say, is this necessary for this person? Was this person, I don't know, will this help this person in this moment? If it will, absolutely do that. Make sure you're going to the team, you're documenting, because those are restrictions. And definitely don't agree to do anything you're not permitted to do by your policies or by DD rules. My example there is not really related to prevention plan, but we've had guardians say, my ward, my individual is NPO, but I want you to pleasure feed, give food, that they enjoy in little small amounts. Don't do that. That's not for staff to do, not for you to do. If the guardian wants to do that or the family, they can come out and do that themselves. But again, I'd get that team involved, document, and make sure those things are, orderly. Lastly, DODD provided another UI investigation. I'm not going to go through all of this. You can take a look at it when you're done. It's basically a peer-to-peer. Mike and Frank, two peers, they got into a fight. Frank punched Mike. They were playing video games. And so staff redirected. They separated. Mike was checked for injuries. Police were called. One thing I do want to point out here is that each incident report is for specific to that individual. So if you have a group incident with 5 individuals, each one of those will have an incident report. If you have a peer-to-peer, you need to have 2 incident reports. So this is Mike's. You'll note the injuries are related to Mike's injuries. The notifications are Mike's team, Mike's guardian, Mike's SSA, and the immediate actions are related to him. There will be some things that are copy-paste that are the same, but those notifications might be different. The injuries might be different. And the cause and contributing factors and plan, that needs to be specific to Mike. So in this case, Mike, you will have the staff monitoring their interactions going forward. That's going to be on both. But in this case, Mike was reminded, you know what, you don't have to play video games with Frank or with Pierre if you don't want to. We don't really note Frank here at all. We have Frank's initials, but for HIPAA purposes, we're trying to keep this specific to Mike. So we'll reference Frank as FD, I think, or the peer, but we're not going to put Frank's information. We're putting nothing about Frank in that. So here's Frank's report. Again, the same. Notifications are for Frank, injuries for Frank. Frank had no injuries, so we're not putting Mike's injuries back here on this body sheet. And the prevention plan is for him to get counseling or, seek strategies and then train the staff on those. I think that's about it. That is a lot. My goodness. All right. Does anybody have any questions? We might get out early. That was just a lot, I know. If you guys do have any questions as you're going through, as you're doing your UI investigations and you're looking at incident reports, you're looking at your policies, do reach out. I'm happy to help you along the way. Yeah, I don't think I have too much else if there's no question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great time.
I'll hang out here for a few minutes, but do check the chat box for the survey to get your hour. Claudia, yes, there will be a certificate when that survey is completed. I believe that's emailed. Yes. And when you get that survey done, you can go ahead and leave, carry on with your day. Kathy, I saw some duplicates. I'm not sure if they're still there or not.
Oh.
Yeah,
Does anyone need us to stay on? Oh, there's a question.